Amelia Johnson relished the warmth of Colorado's late spring sun on her face as she leaned back on a park bench in City Park, Fort Collins. Her weekends had become her sanctuary, a comforting counterbalance to the sharp-edged world of corporate law, where she spent hours dissecting contracts and arguing the finer points of legality. Today, she allowed herself the rare indulgence of serenity, engrossed in the pages of a novel whose spine was cracked and well-worn, evidence of frequent revisits. The sharp rustle of footsteps on gravel broke the tranquility. Two uniformed police officers loomed over her, their shadowed faces obscured by the glare of sunlight behind them. Amelia squinted up, closing her book slowly. Something in their demeanor made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. "Afternoon, ma'am," one of the officers began. His voice was clip-measured. The badge on his chest read Sergeant T. Keller. "Good afternoon," Amelia replied evenly, though her tone hinted at confusion. Sergeant Keller gestured vaguely toward the bench around her. "We had a report of suspicious activity in the park. Someone said you've been sitting here for quite a while. Mind telling us what you're doing?" Amelia blinked in surprise, her fingers tightening slightly on her novel. "Suspicious activity?" She glanced down at herself and the book on her lap. "I'm reading." The other officer, whose name tag identified him as Officer R. Martinez, crossed his arms. "Do you have ID on you?" Amelia's breath hitched, though she kept her expression neutral. As an attorney, she knew her rights intimately. This request was unwarranted. Still, she wanted to diffuse the situation. "I don't believe I've done anything wrong," she said calmly. "May I ask what crime you suspect me of committing?" Sergeant Keller's jaw tightened. "We just need to verify who you are, ma'am." Amelia nodded once, her tone remaining composed. "Respectfully, officers, unless I'm being detained or suspected of a crime, I believe I have the right to decline. Am I free to leave?" Her response seemed to strike a nerve. Officer Martinez's stance shifted, his shoulders tightening. "You're obstructing an investigation," he said curtly. Amelia's heart raced like a wild stallion, pounding against her ribcage with a ferocity that threatened to escape her control. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a tempest of emotions surging beneath the surface. But years spent maneuvering through the treacherous waters of high-stakes legal disputes had honed her composure into an unyielding steel. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the moment. And when she finally spoke, her voice emerged like a beacon of defiance, unwavering and resolute. "With all due respect," she began, each word dripping with the weight of indignation, "requesting my identification without reasonable suspicion isn't an investigation. It's harassment." The tension in the air crackled around her, a tangible force that seemed to pause time itself. "I know my rights," she continued, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination, a woman unwilling to back down against the tide of intimidation. In that instant, Amelia was not just a figure caught in an unwarranted encounter. She was a gladiator standing her ground in an arena fraught with power and oppression, ready to fight for justice against all odds. The conversation shifted from strained to hostile with alarming speed. Keller exchanged a brief glance with Martinez, and before Amelia could react, they stepped in closer. "Turn around, ma'am," Keller ordered. Amelia stood, her pulse hammering in her ears, but she wasn't one to cower. "I've done nothing wrong, and I will not consent to an unlawful detainment," she asserted, her voice clear and resolute. The officer's patience snapped. Keller grabbed her arm, while Martinez pulled out cuffs. Protests erupted around them as parkgoers began recording the encounter on their phones. Amelia caught fragments of indignant voices. "What is she even doing? This is ridiculous." But her focus was on maintaining her composure. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, and the book she had been reading lay abandoned on the bench. As they led her away, she glanced back at the crowd gathering in her defense. For the first time since the ordeal began, Amelia found herself hoping that the public scrutiny would shine a much-needed light on what had just unfolded. The holding cell was small, the air stale and metallic. Amelia sat stiffly on the bench, replaying the encounter in her head. Despite her training as an attorney, the reality of being subjected to such treatment was jarring. She had fought for others in similar situations, but now, standing on the other side of the legal system's abuses, the injustice cut deeper. It was hours before her release, thanks to the intervention of her law firm's managing partner, who arrived with a stern-faced criminal defense lawyer in tow. The charges, obstruction and resisting arrest, were flimsy at best. The offensive irony of those accusations wasn't lost on Amelia or anyone who had seen the now viral footage of her arrest circulating social media. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the asphalt, her phone buzzed with a fervor that felt almost manic, an unrelenting storm of notifications that echoed the turmoil swirling within her. Each vibration sent a jolt through her, igniting her resolve as friends, colleagues, and even strangers, those who had been mere faces in the crowd, flooded her inbox with heartfelt messages of support and solidarity. Their words, some fervent, others gentle, wrapped around her like a protective cloak, reminding her that she was not alone in this battle. But as the days stretched into a suffocating haze of reflection and outrage, Amelia found herself sinking deeper into the complexities of her experience. She pored over every detail, dissecting the implications like a surgeon with a scalpel, seeking to understand not just the injustice she faced, but the myriad of lives that had been shattered by similar circumstances. Each revelation fueled a fire in her belly, a burning desire to rise up against the shadows that threatened to engulf her. Amelia steeled herself, vowing to refuse this injustice, to rend the veil of silence that had cloaked so many for too long. This was no longer just about her. It was a clarion call for the countless others who were voiceless in the face of adversity, who, without the privilege of legal knowledge or access to the courts, languished in despair. She could feel the weight of their unspoken struggles resting heavily on her shoulders, an invisible army rallying behind her. With newfound determination, she prepared to confront the systems that had allowed such travesties to flourish, her heart pounding like a war drum as she transformed her pain into a weapon of change. This was only the beginning. A fierce battle lay ahead, and she was ready to fight, not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced. Guided by equal parts indignation and hope for systemic change, she filed a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and their department. The lawsuit sparked outrage and conversation nationwide. The video was dissected by legal analysts, activists took to social media demanding accountability, and the community of Fort Collins was forced to confront its own blind spots. Though shaken by her experience, Amelia stood at the center of the storm like a lighthouse, refusing to bend. She attended press conferences, her voice unwavering as she spoke about the broader issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. "This case is not just about me," she said firmly in one such address, her dark brown eyes locking onto the cameras. "It's about ensuring no one else has to endure this kind of humiliation without cause or accountability. It's about equity, justice." It wasn't long before her fight drew the attention of activists, law professors, and even high-ranking members of the legal community. Her growing prominence wasn't limited to this case, though. Shortly after initiating her legal battle, Amelia's years of dedication and expertise were recognized when she was appointed to serve as a state judge. The irony of this ascension was not lost on her. Months later, Amelia sat in her chambers, her eyes scanning the docket for an upcoming misconduct hearing. Her breath caught when she saw the names: Sergeant Thomas Keller, Officer Richard Martinez. The circumstances were bizarre. Her colleagues offered to recuse her from the case, understanding the emotional weight it must carry. But Amelia declined. Her training as a lawyer and her commitment to impartiality demanded no less. This was her opportunity to act not from a place of bitterness, but as a beacon of justice. The hearing drew intense media attention. The courtroom was packed to capacity, murmurs of anticipation filling the air like static electricity. Amelia entered with her characteristic poise, her black judicial robes adding to her already commanding presence. When the session began, however, any personal sentiment was carefully tucked away. She addressed both sides with cool, professional detachment, guiding the process with fairness. The evidence presented against the officers was damning. Prosecutors highlighted a troubling pattern in both Keller's and Martinez's records: prior allegations of racial bias and excessive force. Witness testimonies corroborated that Amelia wasn't the first to fall victim to their abuse of power. Each word spoken by the prosecution felt like another stone laid on the foundation of accountability. The defense attempted to justify the officers' actions during Amelia's arrest. They cited heightened vigilance and community safety, but their arguments were flimsy and repetitive. Knowing the law better than most, Amelia watched as their case unraveled beneath the weight of undeniable facts. At one point during the proceedings, she caught Martinez's eye. His expression was steely, defiant, but there was an undercurrent of something else, perhaps fear, perhaps regret. Keller never once met her gaze. When the decision came, Amelia's voice was steady, devoid of rancor, but firm in its conviction. This court finds that Sergeant Thomas Keller and Officer Richard Martinez engaged in conduct unbecoming of their roles as law enforcement officers, violating both department policy and the fundamental rights of the citizens they are sworn to protect. The gavel struck once, sending a resolute echo through the chamber. In the aftermath of the storm that had enveloped the community, the officers found themselves standing at the precipice of a reckoning, their futures hanging in the balance. The consequences they faced were severe and multifaceted. Some were summarily dismissed from the force, their badges stripped away as if they had never truly earned them, while others were thrust into the murky waters of potential civil liabilities, their very reputations teetering on the edge of disgrace. The weight of the decision loomed large, casting a long shadow over law enforcement as a whole and setting a powerful precedent that echoed through the corridors of justice, a clarion call for accountability in the face of misconduct. Yet, the ramifications of this case extended far beyond individual fates. It ignited a wildfire of change within the Fort Collins Police Department. Fueled by the fervent cries of the community for justice and reform, new initiatives began to take root, aimed at dismantling the systemic bias that had long festooned the fabric of policing. Town hall meetings erupted with passionate voices demanding transparency and accountability, as officers and citizens alike embarked on a collective journey to rebuild the fragile threads of trust that had frayed so perilously. It was a profound awakening, a pivotal moment in history where the community, once fractured by fear and division, began to envision a future rooted in understanding and mutual respect. The struggle was far from over, but hope flickered like a beacon, guiding them towards a more just and equitable tomorrow. Amelia's role in these shifts wasn't just as a victim or a judge, but as a symbol of resilience and justice. Her fight for accountability became a cornerstone in the movement against abuse of power. As she left the courthouse one evening, greeted by a round of applause from activists and supporters, she allowed herself a small smile. Her journey had been fraught with pain and adversity, but she had turned it into a tool for transformation. Justice, after all, was not just a concept to her. It was a responsibility. Amelia Johnson, once just an attorney, now a judge, was proof that even the most broken systems could be challenged, and that sometimes the scales of justice could, with enough effort, tip the right way.